Another Bendy and the Ink Machine theory? You betcha! Hey yo prodigies, ProdCharles here. One of the biggest mysteries in Bendy and the Ink Machine is the question of who the gods are in the game. The way Wally Franks describes it, it sounds as if Joey Drew is crazier than a rabbit on a sugar rush. We end up getting hints later on in the game that these gods are real things. But who are they? Let's find out. Just before we begin, if you're new, remember to subscribe and tap that bell for more cool and interesting horror game theories, and if you can't watch this all the way through right now, you can always tap add to and select watch later to save your progress. Or just do it for fun. Let's start with what we know. We know that Joey Drew, the boss at Joey Drew's cartoon studio, performed rituals, and he did so to appease the gods. We also know that there is a character called Wally Franks, who is the janitor at Joey Drew's cartoon studio. Joey Drew and Sammy Lawrence, who is the music director at the cartoon studio, both own a sanctuary. And finally, the ink puzzles that we've come across so far have been to get the ink flowing around the studio again. Got all those facts? Now let's bring it all together. In chapter 1, we discovered that Joey Drew requested that each of his workers provide a sacrifice from their desks to appease the gods. This is something that we learned from a recording made by Wally Franks. However, 2 chapters in and we still don't know who these so-called gods are. Before we can decide on an answer to this, we first have to clear up a few things about how the studio works and the perspective of the workers at the studio. Let's start with Wally Franks. Since Wally is the janitor at the cartoon studio, we have to come to accept that he would most likely be in charge of general maintenance. This would be stuff like cleaning up around the studio and fixing broken things. In fact, this might be why Wally Franks gets so annoyed about the ink pipes in his chapter 1 recording. In our theory on who built the ink machine, we also considered that Wally might have been involved in building things at the studio as well. And by extending the ink pipes, even though it's his job, it might have been the reason why he's so afraid of Sammy in his chapter 2 recording. Speaking of chapter 2, we discover in this chapter that both Joey and Sammy own a sanctuary at the studio. This is because in one of Sammy's audio recordings, he says,
"Every artistic person needs a sanctuary. Joey Drew has his, and I've got mine."
a sanctuary can be considered a place of safety, or a holy place, like a temple. In Sammy Lawrence's sanctuary, we can see that there's an ink pump housed in it that allows ink to be drained outside of his office on a regular basis. In Norman Polk's recording, we find out that Sammy frantically runs to his sanctuary as if the little devil was running behind him, and locks himself in there for long periods of time.
He starts up my projector and he dashes from the projection booth and down to the recording studio like the little devil himself was chasing behind.
There are a couple of reasons why Sammy might do this. One might be to lock himself away from the other workers so that they don't bug him, and another might be because the little devil himself, also known as Bendy, might actually have been chasing him there. The evidence we've looked at so far seems to suggest 2 major things about who could be considered the gods at the studio. The first is that Joey Drew's rituals were performed to summon supernatural entities who would be worshipped as gods at the studio, and these beings would come into reality in the form of Joey Drew's cartoon characters. As we cannot say exactly why they chose the form of 3D cartoon characters, perhaps Joey's book, The Illusion of Living, had a big part to play in this, as it would have featured some of Joey's more popular characters. We also have to consider that there is a Bendy plush, which might also be the reason why only Bendy appears to have a corrupted form so far, and the ink and music offered could also add to the variety of forms the gods could take. On the other hand, we have to consider the role of the wrench and the gear. They are pretty random additions after all. Besides all of this, potentially the largest piece of evidence suggesting that the 3D cartoons are the gods is that Sammy Lawrence worships them. If a cult truly has formed at the studio, then workers like Sammy would be going out of their way just to appease them. Workers like Sammy, who would have been brainwashed or forced into praising these gods, might be going out of their way to keep the gods appeased at all costs. One big counterpoint to this is that we've only seen praise for Bendy so far, even though we know that other 3 cartoons exist, or maybe have existed, at the studio. The second major case that could decide who the god is stems from all of the puzzle solving that we've had to do so far. Isn't it curious that everything we've had to do so far has revolved around fixing the ink machine and getting ink flowing around the studio again? There's even a character who we've identified that probably did all of this himself, and heck, may have even built the ink machine. If you consider Sammy's sanctuary as a holy place and also note that it has an ink flow lever, then it quickly becomes easy to connect the dots. The ink machine itself could be considered a god. But wait a second, what about what Joey Drew said about appeasing the gods? That's God in plural. Well, remember the blueprints in Sammy Lawrence's office? It's widely accepted that these blueprints are for a second model of an ink machine. We've also considered in the past that Ink Bendy spawns in front of the door at the end of chapter 2 to defend the second ink machine. Given that there could be at least 2 ink machines at the studio, these could be the gods that Joey Drew is referring to. After all, the employees at the studio provide offerings on pedestals that help keep on the main power for the ink machine, and it's impossible to find a floor of the studio that doesn't have ink pipes extending through it. It's almost as if the ink machines are truly omnipresent at the studio, imprisoning everybody who enters it. Interestingly, this might also explain a few things on our first point about the 3D cartoons being worshipped. Could it be possible that they truly have the power to set the workers free from the wrath of the ink machines? Judging from what we've seen at the end of chapter 2, probably not. But it doesn't hurt to dream. And let's not keep you dreaming with these videos, which were picked just for you. Take a look and get hooked, and if you're new, remember to subscribe and tap that bell for more cool and interesting horror game videos. And Prodigies, I really hope that these videos help you to expand on how you think, so it helps with your thinking in your daily lives. See ya!